an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood, Season 3, Episode 7, Unauthorized Cinnamon. In this episode, okay, lots of other things happen, but mostly Jane and Joni kiss, Jane and Joni kiss, Jane and Joni kiss, 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 kiss. They're together now, yay, forever. Please never let anything happen to them, show. Please, just do me this one favor. That's all I ask. Just let them be happy. Please. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Okay, I'm real excited about it. Guys, I wanted this so much, and these are just two women who need somebody, and I just can't tell you what. It's a relief. It's a comfort to see that they are reaching out to one another. And I am just so here for it. And I just hope with all of my heart, I hope with all of my parts, not just my heart, that everything continues to just go on an upward trajectory for the two of them, really. These two. So, okay. Let's start from the beginning. Thank you to Patrick for commissioning this episode. Patrick has already commissioned the movie as well, so thank you again also for that, Patrick. I am excited as hell to see because what I have heard is that this show ends in a spot that really felt like a setup for the next season. Like they did not expect it to be canceled. And that people had all just felt like the story wasn't finished and they needed to wrap things up. And I have to say that, I think I said at the end of season 1 that it was one of the most perfect, finales I've ever seen. And that if they decided to end the show there, I would have understood. I think I would still have been satisfied. But ending it, for example, where they do on season 2, as much as I also like that finale, they do finales pretty well on the show. It would have felt pretty we're just meeting George Hearst, all of this. So I am very curious to see how I feel about the finale of this season. And if I have the same sort of instinct about it that other people did. If I am just this isn't done. Come on, guys. So, this episode, I wanted to let you all know also that I think I've mentioned how I've been trying to get my boyfriend Owen into the show. And it can be really tricky because Owen works long hours and late nights. And he'll come home and he just wants to pop on something that he oftentimes has seen already and kind of veg out and play a game on his laptop. And Deadwood is not a show that you can space out. You got to pay attention. And it's even I think important to have the closed captioning on in case you don't catch everything, because there's a lot of small jokes, and turns of phrase that I feel could easily be missed. So I have been trying to get him to watch it, and he has been agreeable to the concept, but every time that he actually gets home and I've suggested putting it on, he's been can't we just put on Brooklyn Nine-Nine so I can just relax? I just don't feel like concentrating right now. And I really understand where he's coming from, but I started to get frustrated. And the other day I finally was all right, listen, we're putting on this episode, please. This is just, you can't keep putting me off. You need to watch the show. So we watched the first couple of episodes, and it is so surreal because this show has it's honestly, they're pretty short seasons, right? The seasons are about 12 episodes, and I've only watched 2.5. And yet, how much has changed from the first episodes is really startling. I forgot what it would be like to see Brom up and about, walking around, fucking screwing things up, or the Reverend is still around. And I realized that an interesting thing about this show, because I was not only watching those episodes over again, but I was writing the entries for the older episodes in the middle of season 2, because I was posting them on Spreaker, that this show deals with death in a really specific way. And this episode in particular, I feel like, is a great example of that because of the implications that arise from a couple of different events. So when I talk about how the show deals with death, there are shows that death is treated as a plot device, or there are shows where death is treated as a spectacle. Game of Thrones being a really, obvious example. And in those cases, death is always sort of like, oh, I can't believe they're gone. And that's kind of it. We had, and I'm going to low-key spoil just a small moment in season 8. There's a moment where they're burning pyres with the dead on them. And there's an acknowledgement of sacrifice in all of this. But that's a sort of unusual thing. The show often kills people and then sort of drops it and doesn't really address what it means to live with that in your, once somebody that's important to you dies, their death is part of your life now. It's a constant thing that just because it's over, it doesn't mean it's not a part of your everyday thought process. My father and grandmother are both gone and have been for 5 years. And I still think about their deaths almost every single solitary day. Death is just something that once it touches you in that way, it stays with you and is around. And we see the Reverend in the first season really making an effort to honor everybody who is killed, whether or not anyone really knows them or cares about them. He wants us to go to their grave and pay our respects, and people do it. When Seth's son is killed, the entire town comes out to honor this little child. And the graveyard is very, very close to the town. You can see it from some of the houses and businesses. And there, I believe that there was already some talk about moving it because it's just a little too close. And as the town continues to expand, it's going to be in the middle of everything. And there's also, the fact that Wild Bill Hickok is dead, but we still have Jane and Charlie going to his grave all the time and talking to him. We have them holding on to his stuff, his letters, his jacket, and in this very episode, Charlie says something about how Wild Bill would have done. And brings up this guy that's in his head still. Bill's been gone for 2 seasons almost by now. And he's not gone. He won't be gone. This person is with these characters and is treated as a character in and of himself still, even though he isn't around. And that's something that I feel that a lot of shows don't take the time to do because it's inconvenient to the plot a lot of the time. So they would rather move on and just have our characters address that death here and there when it's important to the conversation, in its way. But they never have moments for the sake of those moments like we get in this show with Charlie and Jane sort of commiserating about missing Bill in the way that they can, with their poor communication. or letting his decisions inform what they are going to do, or his opinion of them. And even Al, it's like there's something real weird about how his attitude has changed so much, I think, from the first season. Watching Al in the first couple of episodes of the show with Owen, he's a totally different person. He has grown a lot in terms of just being more even-handed about how he deals with things. He is not so constantly angry. He's frustrated, sure, but it doesn't feel like he's quite as completely paranoid as he used to be. It's more grounded in experience, and there's like a calmness to it. And his approach to dealing out death is more restrained, because it seems like he's starting to realize that this town is turning into a real place that consequences of doing things are going to start to catch up with him in a way that they didn't used to. And he has, learned that, yeah, I can still murder and I can still, but I'm going to have to be a little bit more careful about it now. And that's outside of everything that's happening with George Hearst, in my opinion. So this episode, in terms of how it deals with death, what I was thinking of when I said that was specifically two different things. So there's one, the fact that, actually three different things. There's one is the fact that poor what's his name, not Steve, I can never remember Tom Nuttall's friend's name, but that he gets basically poisoned. He is allergic to cinnamon, as it turns out. And that is something that, like, in that era, people wouldn't necessarily realize about themselves, that they are allergic to anything. Allergies, I don't know, like, how much was known at this point in history. But Harry, that's his name. I always forget. But the fact that, like, and it's not that this isn't still true today, but they're, like, testing people for allergies is more of a routine thing. So we get some forewarning a lot of the time. And in this era, when that stuff is unknown until you find out, it's a specter of death that hovers over you without you even knowing it's there. This guy could easily have died. If there had been more cinnamon used, that would have been it. And how constantly, like, at risk these folks are in the most banal of circumstances. All the man wanted was to eat a dish of peaches. That's all. And yet it was like taking his life in his hands. Then there's the Doc, who, like, his death, and guys, I'm looking at the Doc. I know that this motherfucker's probably going to die. But when I tell you how unprepared I am to cope with that, there are no words to really get across how much I dread this happening. I am so not looking forward to the episode where we say goodbye to the Doc. I'm really, like, I feel like it has to happen. The way that his illness is developing, it does not seem like it's reversible. But I'm just still clinging to this hope that maybe he'll be able to pull it through. But the Doc, if he dies, that is going to affect the camp in a really negative way. And then they have to find somebody to replace him. And as Al puts it, figure out all his fucking quirks. And so his death would be incredibly significant to this community. And then the third one is Blazanov. So Blazanov's motivation in this episode, because we saw last episode when Hearst goes to send he gets let out of prison and basically goes straight to the telegraph office. Blazanov has a strict confidentiality. Like, I'm not even sure if that's a policy or if that's just his personal policy. But whatever the case, he has made this very clear to everybody. But he breaks that here. And why? Because the death of his own parents is still so clear in his mind. He describes that briefly to Merrick a couple of episodes ago when they discover the body of that Cornishman in the street. And how his parents were killed in a strange place, just trying to like fucking make a life for themselves. And Blazanov is aware of what Hearst is. He can tell. And he knows this, like, his involvement with this guy's death is so obvious to everybody. And that's the thing about somebody like Hearst, is that he knows everybody knows. That's half the point. He wants them to know. He's not worried about being found out. The reason that he has the power he does is because people are aware he's capable of this sort of thing. So that's nothing to him. Like, he has no worries about that. But Blazanov cannot stand to watch this man take over this camp and treat people the way that his own parents were treated, and rob kids of their parents and people of their futures. And it's a real, like, people's, like, the deaths of somebody else motivating characters in a way that is beyond getting revenge, which is a real lazy, boring trope. I need to get revenge for my brother's death, whatever. This is somebody, the death of someone that meant something, motivating a lot of people to take specific action in specific ways, this episode. And I find that to be really good character work. It's moving and it is very human. And that is how it works. When you lose people that are important to you, it changes fundamentally a huge piece of who you are. It changes maybe what you believe. And it at least changes how you view things from then on. Everything looks different on the other side of that. And I mean, even that episode where we're dealing with fucking Hostetler and Steve, and if that had not been because of, like, William's death, I have no doubt Seth would have behaved very differently. But he was respecting William's memory and trying to do something that he knew that child would be happy with and proud of. And that's, like, it's just, I really, really love that. I really do. And that's sort of what this entire episode winds up circulating around. Because our guys all wind up having this big meeting. And I have to say, I really appreciated that there's a moment where the whores have all gotten together. And this is one of the only times that we ever see. Like, we occasionally have seen in with Al's whores because Trixie has walked in. But she's practically the only one that gets a line. And we've seen in with Sai's whores because of Joni and her interacting with them. And they get lines, but it's like Joni is really not part of their world anymore either. She's a step above now. And this is the first time that we've seen them relax and amongst only each other. And one of them says that, I guess even if you own a bank, if you've got a pussy, you aren't allowed to one of these meetings. And it's completely on point for the period that she would not have been asked to come. But it is absurd, you know, like it genuinely, the fact, this is the kind of thing that, like, women forever have just been like, I can't believe this. Like, everything that I do to prove that I have the mind for this and that I have the money or the power for this, and y'all still keep me the fuck out. But they have this meetup and they're discussing what the hell to do about Hearst, because it's very obvious to everybody that things are coming to a head. Charlie in particular is just like, dude, he's coming for us, because they're all trying to do these, like, half measures. Like, Seth acts like if he goes and, like, man-to-man apologizes or something. Sai is acting like he can take Seth's badge and offer that up like, oh, he's not sheriff anymore, I guess. They're all thinking that there can be, like, these really sort of pathetic displays of submissiveness. And it is way too late for that. Hearst is not going to be satisfied with these, like, it's just not enough. He wanted submissiveness from the get. But now that they have pulled what they all have pulled, it's fucking time to pull a Targaryen and just fucking burn this shit down. And I am really impressed with the way that the show handles this moment. And I like the fact that later when Al talks to Jack, Jack's like, I find this to actually be very sophisticated, because that's exactly true. So we have this moment where Seth has written a letter to, I guess, the widow of the Cornishman who was found murdered in the street. And Seth pulls the letter out, and it's like he's doing it like he isn't even really sure why he's doing it at this moment. And he hands it over to Merrick, and Merrick reads this, and I'm going to read it to y'all, like, as far as what we are able to hear, because it's the beginning of it. Like, Merrick starts talking, and then it gets interrupted by Jewel, who keeps sticking her head out to see who's using the cinnamon, and Dan, who is getting really irritated. But yeah, so it starts out, the guy's name is Pasco. That's right, I forgot about it. That's his first name. So Merrick clears his throat. It becomes my painful duty to inform you that Pasco Carwin was killed earlier this week. And this is when we get interrupted with, I'm seeing who's using the cinnamon. Was not mutilated in any way. His death seems to have been instantaneous, and he was stabbed through the heart. Pasco's funeral occurred today, and was attended by co-workers and friends who all shared the same high opinion of him. Everything was done by kind hands that was possible under the circumstances, and a Christian burial was given him. I was not personally acquainted with Mr. Carwin, save for one encounter where he demonstrated grief and deep compassion at the passing of a friend. I knew him by reputation. Sorry, guys, I'm getting choked up here. I knew him by reputation as an earnest worker and a diligent believer in right and wrong. His memory, I am sure, will always be with those who knew and loved him, among whose number I imagine you as first. A letter from you which I found in his tent causes me to convey this sad intelligence to you. Sincerely yours, Seth Bullock. That is some fucking writing there, guys. Like, there is nothing there that is flowery or over-emotional or melodramatic or inflammatory. Hearst's name isn't even mentioned because he isn't the one this is about. It's really kind of funny when you think, because the only other time I think that we've ever heard the reading of a letter that Seth Bullock has written is when we are hearing him describe to Martha the house that he has built for her. And that letter is so mechanical and so concerned with details that are very impersonal. It's a real difference from that to this. And I like this scene is so beautiful because Merrick is reading this, and everyone around the table is caught completely off guard. Nobody expected this letter. Nobody thought that he had written anything. It wasn't anybody's suggestion that they do this and that he pull it out. He opens it, like, he pulls it out of his coat in a sort of daze, like he's, like I said, not sure why he's even doing it. And when Merrick begins to read it, I'm sure they all expected it to be a letter accusing Hearst, to be a letter explaining that we're going to get this guy, or we're going to do something, like we're going to do what we can to like bring the person to justice. Not even alluded to. He was stabbed in the heart is mentioned as a matter of course. This is how he died. And then they move right past it to, this is how we saw him. This is how we honored him. He had friends. He had people who cared. And we did our best to make sure that we continued to care throughout the end of his life. And you can see as the camera pans around these faces that everybody at this table is deeply moved and did not expect to be. Al, for his part, you can see almost starts to get like teary, and he really like calms himself, but he looks a little shook. And Cy, for his part, looks very shook and is sort of like adjusting his sleeves and things, like sort of trying to distract himself from the words that he's hearing, because you can tell that it makes him feel things. And these are all men for whom feeling things is extremely inconvenient. So Merrick looks at Seth and says, "What shall I do with this, Mr. Bullock?" And Seth stares at him like he wants to say what Al is about to say, but he doesn't really know why. And Al chimes in, "What's your fucking paper for? You fucking publish as witness for Hearst and others to read." And they all have this like expression on their faces as he says this, like, yes, this is what we're doing. But later when you talk to them, nobody seems to really know why they're doing this. And Al is saying to Seth, "That's a very nice fucking letter," as Seth has his eyes all red as well. And Al looks around at everybody like, "All right, I think we've got this all settled." And I'm just blown away by, as Jack said, the sophistication of this plot line. These are men who are being faced with a very real threat to their lives, to their livelihoods, to where they live, their homes, their families. And rather than this be the war council they all intended, rather than this be a plan to attack Hearst in some way and take him down, they err on the side of honoring a person who was harmed by this man and leaving that man's name completely out of it, making it so that this is not about him at all. And that, I think, is something Hearst does not know how to cope with. I would not be surprised if Hearst is super angry at them doing something this subtle, because there's nothing he can say or do that will not be equivalent to an admission of guilt, or at least be seen as blatantly disrespectful. And while I know that Hearst is planning to basically bring in a bunch of dudes and like burn the place to the ground, he's planning on doing that as a surprise measure. And I don't think he wants to tip his hand to everybody in the camp about who he really is that blatantly before he's got his backup. You know, he doesn't even have Captain with him anymore. All he's got is his cook/maid, and she is dealing with her own fucking problems right now. She's not going to be defending his ass. So I just really, like, Hearst is so used to his name being front and center and the attacks being levied against him that something like this is going to be beyond his capacity to deal with in a mature way. I'm just going to be real curious if he sees this, what he makes of it. But anyway, yeah. So, and like I said, everybody like agrees with this plan, but none of them really seems to even understand why. And later, when Al is talking to Jack, he admits that he doesn't understand why. He's like, I did this and I can't even like put my finger on whether or not this was a good idea. So, and you know, compounded with the fact that he gets the news from Blazanov that Hearst has ordered 25, quote, bricks, which I guess is 25 dudes to come and like burn the place down. I think that Al feels like there's something, like maybe he missed a trick here, but I don't think so. I wonder how long it'll take those bricks to arrive, if they'll be here next episode or not. So then we have Jack, and he comes to see Al, and like this, the way that Jack says this, because Al is sitting there staring, really not sure. Like I love the fact that there's that amazing scene between Johnny and Dan and Silas, and is it Jewel, I think, also sitting with them? But they are all trying to figure out, because they seem to be under the mistaken impression that the men who have decided to do this all know exactly why, and they are trying to play catch up. And they're, you know, passing along between them different theories on what the hell this means. But if they saw Al sitting just upstairs, clearly running through the same questions in his own mind and not coming up with an answer, I think they'd be pretty surprised. So Jack comes in, and I love this. When he says, let's see. Oh yeah. Al is explaining to him that he sent for 25 thugs, and he wants to burn down the whole fucking camp and wants to know, why do I feel optimistic? And Jack says, did your meeting find strategy in counter purpose? And Al says, we heard the fucking reading of a letter writ by Bullock to a miner's family after Hearst had him murdered. And he says, exhorting they charge Hearst with the crime, never once mentioning Hearst, expressing sympathy to the family, respect for the way the man lived. We decided Merrick would publish it in the paper. And Jack says strategy some may call ingenuous, others merely off the point. And Al says, I sit mystified. I was moved to endorse it. And Jack replies, mystified, Al, at proclaiming a law beyond law to a man. I think that this is, I really want to get this sentence right. Mystified, Al, at proclaiming a law beyond law to a man who's beyond law himself. I'm coming back to that. At proclaiming a law beyond law to a man who's beyond law himself. Its publication invoking a decency whose scrutiny applies to him as to all his fellows. I call that strategy cunningly sophisticated, befitting and becoming the man who sits before me. It's amazing that Jack gets the nail on the head so hard here, because I don't believe he has met Hearst. And even if he had, Hearst is such a shit that I don't know how many people would get the exact measure of him right away. But we later see a moment that is so hilariously off base, R.E. Hearst's attitude in the world, that proves how correct Jack is here. So I'm going to move on real quick to what's going on with Hearst. I don't really like this storyline, mostly because it makes me incredibly anxious. But we have this whole thing with Hearst and Aunt Lou's son, Odell. And Hearst basically is insinuating at first, and then basically outright saying that Odell is full of shit and trying to con him. And we find out later that Odell, at least he says to his mother, that this mine in Liberia does indeed exist, that he's not trying to con this guy. But it's really understandable why Hearst thinks that. I mean, honestly, how many people have come to him saying this sort of thing? However, once it becomes pretty clear that Odell is, because when Hearst comes out and basically says you're full of shit, Odell doesn't get scared. He doesn't react defensively. He seems genuinely disappointed and offended. Dude, really? I'm trying to get you in on this because I know it will be good for everybody, but you know what? Fuck it. And Hearst can tell from this reaction, okay, you know what? I think this kid is actually serious, because it's clear that he just did not buy it at all. And later on, they take a walk around the camp, and he basically straight up says that I'm going to be tearing all this shit down. Fuck these people. And he then says, and you know what? I'm going to find this exact moment too, because he does that thing that especially I find conservative men do, where they try and turn around every action of other people to make themselves the victim, when in fact they are taking advantage and exploiting all of the people around them. It is the exact opposite, and yet they see themselves as somehow the persecuted party. It's so gross. So he says gold is every man's opportunity. Why do I make that argument? Because every defect in a man and in others' way of taking him, our agreement that gold has value gives us power to rise above. What? This is such bullshit that it's hard to even know where to start. All it comes down to, though, in the end, is that Hearst is a capitalist who thinks that everybody can get enough money together if they really tried, and because we all agree about money being important, that's this equalizer among us, despite the fact that, people, you're literally out here killing folks because they want to organize and get fair working conditions. But yeah, this is going to make us rise above. What do you even, get out of here. And he says, if not for your effrontery during our conversation earlier, I would have seen you shot or hanged without a second thought. The value of the gold restrained me, you see. Your utility in connection to it. Complete shamelessness about how mercenary he is. This isn't even practicality. I mean, I guess it is, but it's practicality stripped down so completely from emotion and the connection to anything that most human beings consider important, that it is self-destructive in a way that Hearst doesn't seem to be able to see. Like, he seems to think if the whole world saw things the way that I did, we'd all be better off. But the thing is, dude, the whole world doesn't see things the way that you do. People have emotions and ties to things that are not important to you, evidently. And they are not going to react the way you want because they have those ties and those desires that are not connected to gold. So he continues, because of my gold, those at the other tables deferred to my restraint. Gold confers power. Power comes to any man who has the color. Odell asks even if he's black, and he says, that is our species' hope, that uniformly agreeing on its value, we organize to seek the color. And then he actually starts to tear up. I'm not kidding, guys. This is so gross, and his acting is so good because he is absolutely serious. The truth that I know, the promise that I bring, the necessities I'm prepared to accept, make me outcast. And he is in tears. And then says, isn't that foolish? An old man. Disabused long ago of certain yearnings and hopes as to how he would be held by his fellows. And yet I weep. I can't, y'all. Basically, we have a sociopath standing here acting like everybody holding me accountable for murder is a bully. I'm outcast. Through no fault of my own, but because they lack the vision to understand the fundamentals of what's important, i.e. gold. Dude. Holy shit. Because he's he keeps on talking about if we all agree on its value. But he isn't following that line of thought. We value gold because it grants us power, yes. But for most people, that power is all they really want to have power over is their own lives. Now, there are certainly power-hungry people out there who want more than that. But the average person wants to be able to live comfortably, to have a family that does not want for things, and to make their own decisions for their lives. And that's it. But he seems to think that everybody is interested in becoming the kind of maniac that he is, that fundamentally that's all everybody wants. And it is so mischaracterizing human beings at large that it's clear he's barely of the same species as us. This is a man who needs to be removed from society because he does not understand what society even means. He shouldn't be part of it. He's a threat to himself and other people. And this scene is it so beautifully sums up the attitudes of so many of the rich today that it made me all the more infuriated because of it. I just got so disgusted. This scene. And Odell is standing there seeming to be like, I can't tell if he actually buys this or not, or if he can see through it or what. But in the end, he asks Hearst whether or not Hearst is interested in sending somebody with Odell to Liberia to check out the gold claim themselves and report back to him. And Hearst says that he's going to take down this place like Gomorrah. I cannot wait to see what that looks like. I really can't. And his poor mother, y'all. He goes back and he talks to her. And she... This is really harsh. Because she had sent him to Liberia out of obvious concern for him. I mean, look at the way that she's having to live. She didn't want this for him. And he says he uses some bad language. And she says something about how he shouldn't talk that way to her. And he says, "Oh, that's right. No bad language. But maybe if you'd brought me up yourself, I wouldn't be doing this because you could have taught me better." And she basically crumples. It's so sad, you guys. And he seemed like the moment that she starts to cry, he seems to really like kind of regret what he said. Like he doesn't, it's like he's ashamed of himself, but he can't bring himself to really admit that or like ask her forgiveness or apologize. He doesn't like seeing her weakness because I think he finds her to be a little manipulative with her crying. But it's like, you know, as somebody who has started to learn a little bit more about what women specifically went through, like black women, what they went through, raising children, what she had to give up to send him away is like beyond what the scope of many mothers can even imagine. And he doesn't seem to appreciate that what she did was not because she didn't want him or because she believed he didn't need her. It was because she wanted better for him than he could possibly get here, and she herself was not free to go. And basically gave him what she couldn't have. But he doesn't seem to quite get it. And he thinks that she didn't want to see him. And explains that he tried to come in and out of camp in a way that she wouldn't spot him. And she says, "I prayed to see you every day you was gone. Oh my God, Odell, what's wrong with you? No joy at seeing my boy?" And he just really, really does seem to think she doesn't want him. He really has internalized and believes that. And how heartbreaking it is to her to see that he believes that. That she did all of this because she loves him so much that she broke her own heart. And he thinks it's because she doesn't care. And fucking white people put them in the position that this is the only choice she had. You know, it's so fucking disgusting. And like Odell is going to carry that, and it's not her fault. But he, like, getting past that feeling of being abandoned by a parent is not an easy thing, and most people don't manage to get past it at all. And she has to live with knowing that as much as she tried to do what was best, and maybe did do what was best, and maybe this is a better version of his life than would have been otherwise, she has to live with knowing that he resents her and always will a little bit. And that's rough. That's really rough. So yeah, that's fucking heartbreaking. There's a really weird moment. I had talked about Jack a little bit earlier. But Jack, there's like this subplot going on with the theater people that I don't understand. I like the concept of it because, like I said before, it's a real like step towards a more civilized Deadwood. You know, it's a addition to society that is beyond necessity of life, and we are moving now into entertainment. So I feel like that's an important impression to give the audience that this is where Deadwood is heading. But as far as the people, I don't know what's happening here. There's this woman, I think Claudia, who slept with Nuttall. Or no, not Nuttall. I always call him that. Nuttall's the one that I like. The other one is the one that I can never remember his name. But she like slept with him, but then looked like she regretted it, and I don't know what that was about. And then we have this scene, like, first Jack is saying good, like, he's caring for one of the elderly men who is on the edge of death, and is sad about it. He's bummed. But he comes into the brothel that they have all taken over, and they're discussing how they're going to build in here and what's going to be set up. And he comes in, and this dude, Bellegarde, asks if the old man is dead. Chesterton is his name. And Jack says to bring him in the evening chill would be imprudent. He's still alive, but we'll bring him tomorrow when the room is less cold. And they talk about how they're going to give the place a dusting, and then they'll start with the carpentry. He asks Bellegarde if he has gotten the carpenters in place. Bellegarde says yes, and then asks he is close to the end, isn't he? And Jack snaps, "Yes, Bellegarde, for Christ's sake." And then just leaves. And it's a weird, like, combo, I feel like, of Jack is sad that his friend is dying, but he also seems to hate Bellegarde. There's something there that's really personal, and I cannot figure out what's going on there. I feel like there's all sorts of personal stuff happening between this crew, and I'm not under the impression that I'm supposed to know, but it's weird how it's being dropped in, and I don't feel like it's going to get explained. Because we keep getting little bits like this, and then the previous bits that we had gotten are not explained to us by the time we get the new ones. So I'm a little bit confused about this whole subplot. But I guess that's fine. I just don't really know what to make of it, like I said. So, two other things that I want to talk about real quick. First of all, Saul and Trixie. There is a really, really touching scene with the two of them. Trixie is railing about how she doesn't want to work at the fucking bank anyway. Who cares? But she's obviously still very worried about the fact that Sophia is there, being exposed to an addict. And not necessarily being well cared for, because it's not like somebody who is high all the time is going to be capable of caring for a child the way she needs to be. And Saul says something about how, well, we could take her. And Trixie, I love how her voice, like, it's, if you didn't know her, the way that we've gotten to know her, the way she says it, you wouldn't realize just how, like, tender she's being with him. But when she realizes that he's basically like, well, you could be like my wife and we could adopt her. She is so touched by that, and she like slides her hand in his, and there's this moment of her really seeming to like absorb all of the implications of the fact that Saul suggested this. And I really, really liked that moment. I really like that she's doesn't bite his head off. She doesn't try and immediately poo-poo the idea. She isn't like, what do you mean we can't do that? Nobody's going to let me take care of that little girl. It's nothing like the defensiveness that we've seen in the past. She is thrilled and really moved and kind of glows a little, and it's really sweet. Juxtapose that with the scene with Ellsworth and Alma. This is so tough. She is kissing Sophia goodnight and then walks away from her thinking, because Sophia's already in bed. I think she's asleep completely. And she comes away from there thinking, saying to herself under her breath, I want to be good. I want to be good. And as she is saying this to herself, Ellsworth appears at the front door. And she says, I want to stop, basically. I want to give this up. And he tells her that he thinks him being gone will make it easier. And she's like, I started to do this when I was 17 years old. You don't have anything to do with it. I was doing this with my last husband as well. Like, it's not about you. And he says the thing that I had been speculating he understood, but I wasn't sure. And his exact words are, my feelings that, being vessel of purposes not your own, your eye was out for relief. But glimpsing since how being your own vessel is preferable, let the pressure come off, and you're liable to do all right. And she says, you're under no pressure. And he says, my friendly hands will always be out to both of you. And guys, the world does not deserve Ellsworth. This is a good man. This is like the kind of good you just don't see. And when women talk about a man who is sensitive, this is the shit that we mean. We don't mean a man who cries at romantic comedies. That's not what we mean. This is sensitivity in that this man sees her as a full person and has the compassion to consider things fully from her point of view and to really understand that she, in many ways as a woman, is not in control of her life. And he isn't pretending that's not the case, and he is acknowledging that her feelings on this are valid and not personal. That this is not because she dislikes him in particular. This is not because he did anything wrong. This is because of circumstances and her own intelligence demanding that she be able to live to her full potential, and being denied that over and over again. That is sensitivity. That is compassion. That is empathy. And I fucking loved this scene so hard. And I'm just like, as much as I want them to actually be able to be husband and wife, as much as I want that, I understand that doesn't seem to be in the cards. But I don't really know what this means for their lives together on paper. I'd be very curious. So I'm trying to think if there's anything that I missed, but I feel like I covered pretty much everything I wanted to. Yeah, I think that's about it. I started off with Joni and Jane, and that was like the number one thing for me. So, all right, I think that's it. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again to Patrick for commissioning this. Sorry, guys, for crying into my microphone several times during this episode. And I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
an Unspoiled Network podcast.